A client deliverable is due tomorrow. 3 internal requests keep arriving. And the task list has become a place where decisions hide. The visible problem is not that there are too many items. The operating problem is that every item appears to deserve the same attention, so the next move is chosen by pressure, memory, or whoever interrupted most recently. Continuing that way costs deadlines, clean thinking, and trust in your own plan. The focused workflow system fixes one decision first, what must move next, and what can wait without damage. Its working artifact is the focus rail map, a single board that turns loose tasks into 3 active rails, a parking bay, and a friction ledger. The practical output is not a prettier list. It is a workflow where every approved task has a next action, a consequence date, and a visible place to move. Disorganization usually survives because the first repair is too shallow. People rename tasks, sort them by project, or copy them into a cleaner tool, but the underlying choice remains unresolved. Which work is allowed to consume attention now? A long list does not answer that. It mixes a 10-minute reply with a client handoff, a recurring chore with a block decision, and a vague idea with a real deadline. The cost is not only missed work, it is repeated re-entry, reading the same item, remembering the context, feeling the pressure, and still not deciding. Stress rises because the list keeps asking the same question without providing a mechanism. The cause is a missing gate between capture and commitment. Until that gate exists, every task behaves like active work, even when it should be waiting, clarified, or removed. The focused workflow system is built around a constraint. Attention moves best when commitment is visible and limited. The focus rail map has 5 components. Loose tasks enter the intake shelf. The decision gate tests whether each item has a next visible action, a consequence date, and a reason it cannot safely wait. Approved work enters one of 3 active rails, each rail representing an outcome that must move during the current planning window. Deferred work goes into the parking bay with a trigger for when it will be reconsidered. After work happens, the friction ledger records whether the rail moved cleanly, was blocked, or was larger than expected. The system controls 3 decisions: what becomes active, what gets scheduled, and what changes the next time a similar task appears. It applies to knowledge work with competing projects. It does not replace judgment, capacity negotiation, or emergency response. The first operating rule is the 3-rail gate. No planning window carries more than 3 active outcomes, and no task enters a rail unless it has a visible next action, a consequence date, and a clear reason it cannot wait. This rule works because it separates importance from activation. Many tasks matter, but only a few can be moved with real attention before the next review. Use the gate when planning a day, a week, or any period where competing work is already crowding the surface. Do not use it to ignore a true emergency or to avoid a difficult commitment conversation. The decision changes from asking, "What should I do?" to asking, "What must move next?" and "What can wait without damage?" The intended outcome is a small, active field where every rail can be touched deliberately instead of a large list that only gets scanned. The second rule is to block time by rail, not by task fragments. A rail block protects one outcome long enough to create a visible change: a draft section, a sent proposal, a reconciled file, a reviewed design, or a cleared dependency. The practical default is a block long enough to finish one next action without rebuilding context every few minutes. Short administrative items can be batched outside the rails if they do not drive a current outcome. The trade-off is real. Rail blocks reduce instant availability. That is why they fail when the surrounding environment expects immediate response, and no communication boundary has been set. The midpoint self-audit is simple. If your board has more than 3 active outcomes, If any rail lacks a next visible action, or if parked work has no trigger, the system is leaking attention. Fix the board before adding another block. Consider an independent operations consultant planning a compressed week. She has 2 client workshops, a process audit due Friday, 6 follow-up messages, and a proposal request. Her constraint is visible. Only 3 deep work windows remain after meetings. At the decision gate, the audit becomes Rail 1 because it has a Friday consequence and a next action, reviewing sample transactions. The workshop materials become Rail 2. The proposal is placed in the parking bay with a trigger to reconsider after the audit draft is sent. She blocks 1 Rail window for evidence review, 1 for workshop revision, and 1 for the audit summary. The trade-off is that the proposal waits 48 hours, so she sends a brief expectation-setting reply instead of pretending it will move immediately. The measurable output is an audit draft, revised workshop deck, and a clear parking trigger. The takeaway: the system does not make the week lighter. It prevents low-commitment work from stealing high-consequence movement. The third rule is the focus exchange. When a 4th outcome demands entry, it must replace a rail, wait in the parking bay, or trigger a capacity conversation. It cannot quietly become hidden active work. This rule exists because overload often enters through invisible exceptions. 1 extra request looks harmless until every rail loses enough time to stall. The meaningful trade-off is between responsiveness and throughput. Generic advice cannot decide that trade-off for you because the right choice depends on consequence, reversibility, and trust. A reversible request with no near consequence usually waits. A high-consequence client blocker may replace a rail. A request that matters but cannot fit requires renegotiation. The failure condition is pretending the 4th rail is free. The decision changes from adding effort to exchanging capacity. When used correctly, the board shows the cost of saying yes before the promise is made. A creator managing a small educational channel plans 1 long-form piece, 3 short edits, sponsor revisions, and community replies. The visible constraint is a 2-day recording window before travel. The focus rail map starts clean. Rail 1 is the long-form outline. Rail 2 is sponsor revision. Rail 3 is batch recording. Then, a microphone fails during the first recording block. The original plan breaks. Instead of stuffing repairs into every rail, the creator marks Rail 3 as blocked in the friction ledger and moves a dependency action to the front. Borrow equipment by noon. Short edits move to the parking bay with a trigger after recording is recovered. The trade-off is losing daily posting rhythm to protect the larger recording window. The inspectable output is not a perfect schedule. It is a repaired rail with 1 dependency action, a recorded batch later that day, and a review mark showing that equipment checks must happen before future recording blocks. The learning loop changes the next attempt. Technical setup becomes a gate condition, not a hopeful assumption. The system fails in predictable ways. The first misuse is decorating the board instead of making decisions. If a card lacks a next visible action, it belongs at the gate, not on a rail. The second is using the parking bay as a graveyard. Parked work needs a trigger, such as after a draft is sent, when a response arrives, or at the next Friday review. The third is overfilling rails with sub-projects. A rail should represent an outcome that can visibly move in the current window, not an entire life category. The fourth is ignoring friction marks. A blocked rail without a dependency action will block again. An inflated rail without subdivision will be underestimated again. The response is not to abandon the system. Remove unqualified cards, restore the 3-rail limit, and let the friction ledger change the next gate decision. The opening tension was a task list where every item seemed active, and the next move was chosen by pressure. The focused workflow system resolves that tension by making commitment visible. use 4 operating takeaways. First, capture freely, but commit through the gate. Second, keep no more than 3 active rails in a planning window. Third, block time for a rail outcome, not for scattered fragments. Fourth, when a 4th demand appears, exchange capacity instead of hiding the cost. Fifth, review friction marks so the next similar decision is better informed than the last one. The diagnostic question remains the control point. What must move next, and what can wait without damage? When the board answers that question, the task list stops being a source of pressure and becomes an operating surface. The observable change is simple: fewer hidden commitments, clearer next actions, and a workflow that can be corrected before the next deadline is at risk.